All right. So, welcome to content warnings, where playing nice is what we want to do in general with content warnings. During this hour, we have three authors, and I just went over their names, but I'll do it again. See, Sydney Brianna, Megan Rose Fawkes, and Reana Malori are going to be sitting on our panel, and we're going to ask them some questions. At the end of the questions, we will have a Q&A. So feel free to ask questions at that time. You can put questions in the chat or you can just ask the questions. It's whatever you want to do. But again, it'll be at the end of the panel. We want to thank Sex Symbol Podcast for sponsoring this panel today. If you're looking for some ladies who really shake things up and are a lot of fun, they are your girls. All right, so are we ready for our questions? We're just going to go down the line. Each of you can answer, try to keep your answers 2 to 3 minutes, just so that we have enough time to go through all of them. All right. So I guess we're going to start because this is the way I see it. I see Sydney, Megan, and Rihanna. That's how. So we're going to go in that order because that's how you're up on my screen. All right. Why do content warnings matter to you, or do they matter?
They do matter. I write erotic romance, and I feel like one of the tenets of romance is consent. And going into any story, you should have consent between the reader and the author. You want to let your reader know what they're getting into so that they can walk away if they don't want to be exposed to that content. So for me, it is very important.
Megan?
So I think that content warnings matter greatly because a reader is basically placing their trust in an author when they agree to read something. And that author is meant to deliver on promises that were made in summaries and marketing and forwards. And so I think that if content warnings are used effectively, they have like this mutually beneficial function for both readers and authors.
Okay. Rena?
So I agree. I do think they're important, especially when you're touching on a topic in the book that some people may choose not to read. So for my books, because I write all interracial romance and my characters are Black women, I try and make sure even on the page, the product page, I make sure that readers know that this is an interracial romance book. And if there is something in there that I need to highlight, whether it's BDSM, whether it's mafia killing, murder, death, kill, whatever you want to do. I do try and be mindful of that. I also have a few books that have focused on some not so sexy topics, like domestic violence. And so I make sure that I point that out as well. So I think it is something that you're trying to make sure the reader understands what they're picking up. In general, I think as you know, both with Megan and with Sydney, I write erotic romance. I write things that push the boundaries. And so while in general, my readers and those who have read more than one of my books understand that, if there's someone who is new to me, they may not. So I do try and point that out to them so they know what they're purchasing and what words they're going to see on paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The difference to you between content warnings and trigger warnings.
So I think, is that for me? We're going back to me?
Okay. Yeah, good. We're going to go back in order.
All right. I think that content warnings are broader in purpose, while trigger warnings call out very specific topics that someone may encounter that could connect to trauma they experienced. However, I really don't like the term warning at all because I feel like it's like a tornado warning versus a tornado watch. The implication there is that you are going to be impacted by this, but we don't know that. So I use the term sensitivity disclosure so that people can make that decision for themselves. But that's just a personal preference of
mine. Okay. Megan?
Yeah, so I would argue that a trigger warning is always a content warning, but a content warning isn't always like a trigger warning. I feel like they act the same way, but they serve different purposes. So, for example, saying that a work contains oral, for example, would be a content warning for me, but for someone who's had a bad experience with that, that would be a trigger warning. I would argue that the purpose of one is for satisfaction, and then the other one is more for safety.
Megan, I like how you put that one is for satisfaction and one is for safety. So I agree with that. It's the trigger warnings or the sensitivity awareness, right? It's just making sure that they know something in this book has a potentially a negative connotation. And I want you to be aware of that. Like you, even if you've never been personally impacted, you may know someone who's been impacted by that. So again, like I said, I think for me the trigger warning would be if a book of mine contains domestic violence or stalking or something such as that, because we don't know what others have been through, and that can be a very traumatic experience. So, but I think for the content warnings, it's just, hey, just be, you're going to get some good stuff in here. Just be prepared. I want to make sure you're good. So, yeah, I agree with that approach. Yeah.
So that was kind of the next question was, do you think people use them, if authors use them as selling points? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I think you guys kind of answered it, but if you want to elaborate on that a little bit more.
I think for readers who may be looking for a deeper viewpoint of a lived experience, that it can be a draw. I think it can, but it also might be a deterrent if it doesn't actually meet those expectations. So you may have a content warning like, I've got all of this juicy stuff and it goes really dark and really deep. If you don't deliver on that expectation, then it could actually kind of backfire.
Right.
And then you might have a disappointed reader. So I think, I think it could be if done correctly and you actually support it with whatever your content is.
I think
Megan.
That's honestly a really good point. Like that reminds me when I wrote my latest book, it was meant to be kind of like the most triggering thing that I had written. And so I made like all these promises of like, it's too spicy for Amazon and it's all just, it's gonna be careful. And then like people read it and they were like, yeah, it was good. Like, oh, okay. Never mind. I'm not as edgy as I thought I was. But no, broadly, I think that they are very much like I'm sorry, words are coming badly to me. I do think that they are kind of good for letting people know what they're in for and kind of enticing people almost, especially if people are deliberately looking for kind of a more wild ride.
Yeah, and I see, if everyone, there's a comment in the chat, so I'm just going to point everyone's attention there. I don't know if you need me to do that, Sunny, but I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if you wanted us to pause.
Well, I was gonna wait after this, after you answer.
Okay, perfect. So I agree. I think when authors use the content warnings or highlight something that's in the book, I think we as authors, we want to be realistic, but we also want to sell. So if we believe that our book is super spicy and you're going to need a fan and turn on the AC because you're going to need a dress and let's fan her out. We want to entice readers to those stories. So we use words like Megan was saying, like too spicy for Amazon, right? Get ready for it. This is unlike anything you've ever read before. It's steamy, it's hot, it's, blow your mind sex. So we want to entice, but I think it's important for us to also make sure that we're not over promising and under delivering with our content warnings or things that we highlight in the book. So it's always, I think it's a bit of a tightrope of, do you even bother using that, or do you simply say steamy, erotic, whatever, right? And is that enough? Is that enough for people to know that they're going to get all the words, they're going to get all the description, they're going to get, choking, handcuffs, whips, whatever? Is that enough? And so I think it is a tightrope between the enticing readers to your book, but also giving them realistic expectations so they don't also shy away from it, and say, what, that I can't read. I don't want to read anything like that. So I think it's a tightrope. I think we just have to be mindful and careful of what words we do use.
And I
Right.
think to build on that, there's actually a sensitivity aspect to using it
Mhm.
as a marketing device, because for the
Mhm.
people that have concerns in those areas, it's not really a joke, so they may
Yeah.
consider it being flippant or insensitive, and you're never going to please everybody, right? That's not going to be a thing. But if we can start off in a respectful position and do it respectfully, I think it'll be received better.
Good points. Okay, so this is the time I'm going to tell all of the attendees we have a scavenger hunt. And if you have attended at least 5 panels and collect the word from the panels, then you'll be entered into a drawing. The scavenger hunt giveaway is worth $100. It has lots of signed books. It's a great giveaway. So your word for this panel is paramour. So just take note of that and take note of it on all of the other panels once you go. And at the end, we will tell you how to register those words. So on to the next. Okay, so is there a difference between content warnings with nonfiction and fiction, do you think? And how are they used differently?
Well, honestly, I don't think I'm intelligent enough for that question. I think that I think they try to achieve the same goal, and that is
Okay.
to inform the reader of what they're going to dive into. And some things in history are terrible. And I think people who read nonfiction already go into it with that mindset, as well as with fiction, especially romance and erotica. I think the reader expectation is set like I'm going to dip my toe into this pool. Who knows what's gonna happen? But I think they kind of echo one another. I don't really know that for me there's a big distinction.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually agree kind of a lot with that. Like, if you're going into a nonfiction material, you kind of already know what it's about, at least from like cultural osmosis and all that kind of thing. You already kind of know what's in there versus fiction, which can be a lot more broad because it is imagined and there's not really there's a set expectation of what's going in, and that's why the content warning is there in the first place. But it's not something that you kind of already knew going in.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's on the nonfiction side. I think there's a healthy dose of reality that's coming along with that. It's kind of just the facts, ma'am, right? And so history is not pretty and it's not easy and it's very difficult. And so I think it does serve the same purpose in the sense of you're informing the reader of what they're about to open themselves up to. But I also think when you're a nonfiction reader, that you kind of have this idea already that what you're about to read may be very difficult, especially if you're focused on history. You know, whether you're a history buff of the wars or, you know, the Crusades or something, you know, whatever it might be, it was blood and it was messy and it was not very nice to people. And so I think when you go into it, you know you're about to have an experience that may be uncomfortable, but you're in learning mode. You're in I want to understand more mode. It's in I'm expanding my knowledge mode. And so I'm going into it knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable. I still think the content warnings are important, but I
Yes.
think there is a different mindset in that you're going into reading it with. When you have the fiction, especially romance, erotic romance, you're going into it with okay, I'm about to settle in for this amazing read and I'm going to go into this new world and I'm going to read some super steamy sex scenes. And I know they're going to talk about arrow A going into slot B and all this other
Right.
stuff that, you know, that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
may, experience some other kind of fun things. And so you go into it with a different mindset.
Right.
So I think they serve a similar purpose, but for different reasons.
Yeah, and I
That's
think
fair.
even in the nonfiction vein, trigger warnings would be appropriate for very graphic
Mhm.
representations of things that actually happened. So,
Yeah.
just let the reader consent to what they're about to experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not really sure I agree completely with trigger warnings for nonfiction.
Okay.
I just because I feel for non because I feel like that's history, it's these different things. We know it's uncomfortable. I mean, we know
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be horrible. We know like these things, and the reality is the majority of the things that are being put out there and a historical factor we've heard somewhat about. We know kind of going in what's going to be in there. But that's just my point of view. I do
Yeah.
really think that they're important for fiction,
Mhm.
extremely important for fiction. Um,
So I think my deviation there would be if you're going to explore a particular event in graphic detail, there may be very specific verbiage in there that's not broad like a situation. So
and
that's where I would lean more towards a trigger warning, like a rape scene that was very vivid, not just brushed over, but explored. Um,
right,
Yeah.
so that's kind of where I would land. But I absolutely see what you're saying is great.
yeah, yeah. Um, okay, the last question, um, is do you think it would be easier for a book to have a rating system like movies?
And she snorts. I don't. So Uh, okay. So this is very much a personal opinion. No, I don't think that we need rating systems. I think, just the experience of dealing with all the keywords. This is from an author perspective as well.
Right.
You can only have so many keywords and everything becomes so compartmentalized. And I feel like it'll impact discoverability. I think that by 18 and over, we know it's in the rated R, rated MA vein.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I understand how it could be beneficial. I really just don't want any more categories or
More anything
roadblocks
that we have to do.
finding my
Yeah.
readers.
Yeah.
So that's probably a selfish answer, but that's where I lie.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a super fan of the idea either, just because I think that there's only so much that you can warn for. Like I'm thinking about this like in a couple of different directions. For one, like films will say things like this film contains depictions of graphic violence, but like we don't know what that necessarily means. Does that mean just like murder? Does that mean cannibalism? We don't get to know that just from graphic violence. So it kind of makes it sort of ineffective. The other thing is that, and I'm kind of thinking more about like video games in this case, like when you get a rating system, suddenly that rating system becomes enforceable. And that didn't happen until like the 2000s when there was this huge moral panic regarding what was it? I want to say Grand Theft Auto, might have been Postal.
It was. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
Grand Theft Auto.
thank you. Yeah. And so there was this whole concept around the idea of like who is this rating system for? What are we going to do about this? Oh, I guess we need to enforce this rating system somehow. And so it becomes something where suddenly authors are losing control of their ability to market even more so than they already are impacted by things like I'm not even sure what we would call the sudden depornification of the internet, but suddenly that whole movement becomes actively detrimental, even more so to authors.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. I don't believe a rating system would be effective for us, but I have a personal story that gives some credence to that. Is I have a story that is, all the things. It is a romance with erotic elements. Okay. But the story is about a woman who is the daughter of a deacon of her church. And so there is a lot of conflict within herself and her family and the relationship and what she wants for herself and how she interacts with the main male character about their life that is in conflict with the church. Now, mind you, the story is not a Christian story. The story is not in any way about the church in the sense of I'm not promoting anything about the church. It's simply this is a part of who she is. Because that story, for whatever reason, because that story had those elements of who she was as a deacon's daughter in the church, they categorized it on Amazon as a Christian romance. And so someone states like, Brianna, why, wait, this is a Christian romance? And I'm like, whoa, absolutely not. Never, what? What are you talking about?
Yes.
So I'm like, no, I'm talking about arrow A into slot D and tongue X into, like, no, this is in no way, shape, or form. And so I think a rating system, whether it's by us or by the platform that we sell our books on, if they have something that they can enforce on us or they can identify our books as a certain way, I think it just causes a lot of confusion and with our readers and those who want to buy our books. And so I think it should be up to the author to provide keywords, to provide whether it's content warnings, whether it's in the description, whether it's in the title, however we want to use it. I think it's up to the authors to identify as best we can who the audience is for our books, because we're the ones who have written the book. We know what the book entails, so it should be up to us and not an arbitrary rating system. That would be my thought.
Yeah, and I think building on that, that's great points that you have there. Is there a separate rating system for sex and and then one for violence?
Right.
You could have something that's rated R with no sex in it because of the violence, and it just becomes so complicated and exhausting. Just the sound of it exhausts me.
Yeah. Yeah,
I agree.
It is a lot. Mm-hmm. That is it for our questions. However, we do have a lot of comments that I'm going to look through, and then we're going to open it up for any of the attendees if they want to ask you guys any questions.
Right.
So,
if I could just add one thing for the authors in the room who are considering content warnings, as a pro-con situation. I think that if you have content warnings or you have some sort of sensitivity statement, that you're less likely to get bad reviews based on people who encounter content they're not prepared for.
Right.
And possibly even fewer returns, which have financial consequences. So whether the reader wants to utilize the tool or not, just having it there is an expression of respect. And so, do the thing. If you feel like a content warning is right for your book, do it. Don't worry about what the ether says. Just go ahead. Do what's right for you.
Yep. Okay. Our first comment was danger. She says, as a reader, I don't read trigger or content warnings. I find them unnecessary after I read the back blurb. And I'll know if it's a book I like or not.
That's a good point. And I think that kind of bleeds in. Oh, I'm sorry. Kind of bleeds into writing blurbs effectively, which you can write 70,000 words.
So hard, and it gets harder and harder too with restrictions from your different platforms.
Yes.
Yes. But I agree with that. I think the blurb is going to really highlight for the reader what the book is about. I think, and until you read the story, you won't know everything. but I think the blurb, a well-written blurb, is going to give you an idea of whether or not it's a book that you should steer away from. And so it's weaving in some of the phrases and wording that's going to give you an idea that this book is, we're going to have some BDSM, we're going to have some whips and chains, we're going to have full out descriptions and words and all of that.
Right.
I think a well-written blurb does help with that.
Yes, I agree. Sarah says she uses them as a shopping list, which I find
hard mood.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's see. I feel like some of the responses are gone. Marty says, I think trigger warnings for nonfiction would be good. I listen to murder podcasts all the time that issue trigger warnings about the content, even though it's all nonfiction.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. Mary says, see, I think some kind of warning is appropriate because the blurb might not be able to cover everything that is in the book without giving away the whole story. It's to protect the readers. There's a little thing covering part of her stuff. Might not like the blurb, the story plot, but they might need to skip the book. It's not about complaining, it's about mental health. And I get that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they can work together as tools for the reader. I don't think you have to have just one.
Right. Yeah. Ranch says he'll talk more about his feelings in the transgressive panel on this, but he sees some of your guys' points. He's one of the panelists on that panel. Marty, question for the panelist. As someone who isn't triggered or bothered by explicit content, I often do think about when to issue warnings. How do you judge when or if you need to put it in a story, a warning in your story?
I actually just add it for every story. I let the reader make the decision for themselves. I'm not trying to make that decision for them. So I'll put anything I think could be a potential point of sensitivity. Now, mind you, I'm not in everybody's heads. I don't even know if I have a comprehensive list of everything. I try to hit the highlight reel, so to speak. Like, these are the known things that may cause sensitivity, but I just throw it in there. And if people want to ignore it, they're welcome to. And if they want to read it, then equally is welcome.
Yeah.
I have a question to piggyback on that. I'm sorry, Megan. I have a question
please,
for
go ahead.
Sydney and Megan to piggyback on that. Do you put your content warnings on the product page or on the first or second, in the front of the book only? How do you both handle that?
So I put it at the beginning of the book before they really engage in anything. What I would love more than anything is for retailers to allow you to link to a content warning, because they won't let you put it in there before they even purchase the book. They can make their decision. I feel like that's a disconnect when it comes to sensitivity, but I put it at the forefront. Like, here you go. I think it's maybe after my acknowledgments or my dedication page. That's where I put it.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I actually read one book that put all of their content warnings at the end because their understanding was that the Amazon algorithm would pick up on all of those words at the beginning of the book and like shadow ban it or something. So, and like on one hand, I was like, well, they got it in there, but then I told my partner about it and they were just kind of like, what the heck? Like, can they read that before? I said no.
Yeah. So can anyone speak, by the way, you guys?
Yeah, I was gonna open it up to everybody.
Oh, okay, I'm gonna shut up then.
No, I think you're fine. Because we've kind of went through, I believe, most of I'm just gonna check the comments to make sure I get all the comments open, and then I was gonna open it up. Let's see. how do you handle content warnings that are so it's not a spoiler?
Mm,
Well,
that's hard.
I don't know that those, I guess for me, it doesn't feel like a spoiler because I'm not telling the story. I'm just telling very specific, like you are going to encounter ABC. It's more like a bullet point type of thing. I don't really go into a story, about the moment. It's so I don't really consider it a spoiler myself, but that's maybe a personal approach. So I suppose for some it could be.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat because I don't think that any thing that I would feel the need to list a trigger warning for, which kind of going back to, I believe it was Marty's comment about like, how do you know when you need one? I usually don't use anything that would need a trigger warning as like a plot point. So I don't think that anything that I would need to warn for has been a spoiler. That said, kind of, I think that I'm not sure when I would ever need to like consider it a spoiler warning. And if it is, then I think I would just word it very carefully, or even just kind of warning within the warning, which can get very strange of just like this next part contains spoiler warnings for the thing. There's also like I used to be like a fan fiction writer, so I cut my teeth on like Archive of Our Own, which has a really robust warning and rating system. Part of which is that the creator chooses to not archive warnings, meaning that there are things that would be considered something of a content warning, but because it's a spoiler, they don't want to put it in the actual warnings themselves.
Interesting.
I didn't know that's what that meant.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we can, sorry, Rihanna, do you have something? Okay.
No. I just second, I agree with them.
Yeah. I think we can open it up to everybody. So if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask them.
So you guys, I'm Parneet, by the way, based in Austin. I don't know where you guys are, but I'm super happy to be here with you. I actually did a pretty comprehensive survey that closed just, a few days ago. So it's like hot off the presses. And basically, it was more than 500 readers, close to like 510, 515 readers of like spicy stories, erotica, etc. And the question was, do you want content warnings? And if so, which ones? And about 66% of them said they want content warnings. And if anyone's interested here, I'm happy to share the top ones that they wanted. But yeah, it sounds like the majority of readers do appreciate it.
I think it's impactful for those readers who need it, and the ones that don't can ignore it.
Right.
It doesn't take me much more effort to include it. It is just a little statement. And so, I mean, I feel like it's just one more thing I can do for the reader to make this a wonderful relationship, because that's really what it is. We're in a relationship at that point. First book you're dating, series, you're like going through, I'm in love, I want to finish this out. So I definitely,
It helps more than hurts, right? So if people don't want it, they can ignore it. But the people who do want it, like it helps a lot more. So for example, people who've undergone trauma, right? Like sexual abuse was the number one thing that they wanted as a trigger warning. I get it, right? And then in case someone's interested, the first was sexual abuse, second was self-harm, and then non-consent.
I think it's great that you did that survey. That's awesome.
That's great. Yeah.
If I can add, that's a really good point, Barney, because one of the issues that I run into, and first of all, I love the difference between trigger warnings and content warnings that you guys described. Actually, trigger warnings and content promises, maybe. But
there we go.
As somebody who doesn't get triggered very easily, Barney, that kind of, I mean, obviously, non-consent, suicide, et cetera, those are things that are kind of obvious, but there are a lot of other things that would potentially trigger people that I wouldn't think about because I don't get triggered very easily. So, maybe we need a list.
Well, I'm happy to share the list that I have with you guys. You just let me know who to send it to.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, by the way, it can be sliced and diced by stuff like sexual identity, orientation, race,
Right.
age.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that this is the one thing I kind of hate about sensitivity disclosures, that we're in this cultural moment where we have to put things like, Brianna, what you were saying, interracial couples or homosexuality, or, you know, that we have to, like, that. Why is that even a, but I know it is. I know it is. And you know, everybody has their feelings about things, but I'm hoping someday we can move away from those aspects being triggering, so to
But
speak.
does that mean
Well,
that you
you
have to
guys,
play
I'm
into
not.
that?
That was
I mean,
one of my
don't,
questions earlier, Sydney,
yeah,
about the fact that are we at a point now where we have to like worry about interracial couples? I mean, I don't think so, but I mean, people need to see that on paper, you know?
We
I
don't.
Right, exactly.
No,
We don't need
Yeah,
to
no,
know.
I
we
don't.
don't.
We
I-
don't.
right, right. But I
I
mean,
know if it's
the
a
readers
trigger warning
the
as much
readers
as a
that we have
content
to,
warning.
yeah, the
That's
content
fair,
warning,
Sonny.
but yeah, but the
More of a
content warning and stuff
But
content
it
like
could
that.
be both. I mean, it could be both
awareness.
depending on your
You know.
situation,
But you
but
know what,
I
you
think it would
guys,
be
like
both.
exactly what you said, disclose that it's interracial couples. I'm obviously a woman of color, but like disclosing that a story is about interracial couples, etc. I don't think readers care, quite honestly. I think it's the vocal minority that cares and talks about it, and we hear them. But most people don't seem to care about it. And look, like I spent like a good $3,500 on this survey, and I am telling you, there are like lots of questions, and at no point did something like this come up. And it's a very robust sample size, right?
Well, I'm
yeah.
encouraged to hear that, actually. I think
Mhm.
that's great that that's how it's trending, because going up to this point, like some of us have 15, 20 years under our belts, right? And all kinds of things have been considered reportable, if you will. But I would love, and I love to hear that the trend is we don't necessarily need to say that anymore because it's not a thing. So,
Well,
I think it's also, let me just jump in here.
Sure, please.
yes.
Yeah.
Let me just jump in here. So I think it is something, and it's great. I mean, I think here in this, absolutely, it is something that we don't want it to be something that people need to know. But the reality is that people will not buy books if there is a Black female character with a white male. They just won't do it. So I hear that, but that is the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
Or if they purchase a book, today I'm at a book conference, a book signing, and I've been to many over the 15 years I've been writing, and I can guarantee you I will tell them that my book is interracial and they will pass by me. So that is the reality, right?
Yes.
And so something that when I put books out, I do need to tell people that the book is an interracial romance featuring a Black woman and a white male, because there are some people who feel that content awareness they will not purchase that book. Now, there are some
don't tell them
that will drive, sure. But then there are something that will see that and they will like, oh, I'm there, I want it. And there are some who don't care. So you do have a good mix. But I think it's the being honest with your readers so that a good story is a good story. Absolutely. But it is something that we should just be mindful of, is our readers. It is a relationship, as you said, Sydney. Right. It is a relationship between the author and the reader. And we want them to enjoy the story without any preconceived notions of what they're going to get. And I think, as we talk about content awareness and content warnings, I like content awareness.
I was
content promises. I like content promises. I like that.
Rihanna, you're onto something for sure. There's definitely this subsection of readers or the public that cares. By the way, some time ago, I was messing around with AI, I work with a lot of startups and I use AI for like really dry stuff like white papers and stuff. No emotion, no story, no emotion. Anyway, I'm messing around trying to get pictures, images. It was incredibly hard, you guys, to get images of
Yes.
interracial couples. I found I could get some of Black women and white guys. I got absolutely none after trying for 45 minutes of white women and Black guys. It blew my mind.
Yeah, I encountered that as well, looking for marketing images for one of my stories. I even wrote the company. I'm like, hey, y'all need to get with the times. We need pictures.
I guess I'm kind of talking about like the need for things like interracial content warnings and like LGBT content warnings. I guess I'm wondering, like, at what point does that just become something that we have? Like, it's as expected as like the there's only one bed kind of trope. Like, at what point does it just become like a descriptor of a book and not a content warning? Because I would argue it doesn't need a content warning. I don't go outside every day with a shirt that says content warning, homosexuality. Like, I don't.
I
It's
know.
ridiculous. Although now I want that shirt. Now that I'm saying it, but I don't. I guess I'm wondering, like, at what point does it just become like an accepted fact of life that this is a thing that exists, and we don't need to warn you for it because it's not inherently harmful?
That's the day I look forward to.
It's like those content warnings at the beginning of a TV show where it's like, this character smokes. I don't give a care.
Yeah.
Good for him. I think it's fun.
Like 90% of my characters smoke. I mean, I'm sorry. It just happens.
Well, and I think a really good example is, do you guys watch the show The Boys?
Yeah.
Well, they changed the title and of the final episode, and they also had a content warning before it because of the events, with the attempted assassination of former President Trump. So like real life events affect the content that we consume. Kind of like when the Columbine shooting took happened, my mom wanted me to throw away my Super Nintendo version of Doom.
Yeah.
Remember those days? So I mean, I think it just depends on real life events changing how we consume content.
And I think that's very specific to the United States, isn't it? I don't feel like that's global. I think this is a US.
I know a lot of other countries around the world have very strict content warnings or content stuff. Like Australia, for instance, they can't play certain video games that the US can play because of the content.
They'll refuse classification and they won't import it, basically.
Exactly.
Oh,
yes.
okay. Because when I go to Europe and I'm walking around and I'm observing, I think, wow, y'all are kind of next level compared to the States. So it's very interesting.
So we've had some comments. Reana says some people avoid stories that may treat people as a fetish, and that may be why some people want to avoid interracial stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
One would hope that we get to the point where it's not written that way.
We would hope, yeah. I mean, one would hope that, but we're not there.
High in the sky.
Yeah. Yeah. But that is a very good point.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I thought I saw one comment going back to the LGBTQ plus community where someone mentioned, what if you have a story where there is sexual fluidity or
there was, and I looked for it again and I couldn't find it.
There was. Okay,
there
so
was. Yeah.
That up. Okay.
No, there was, and when we went back and I was looking for it, I couldn't find it. So if I'm missing it, and you asked that,
it was towards the top of the discussion.
I found. Yeah, you found it, Megan.
I'm looking for it. Here we go. Somebody had said, what about for pegging or sexual fluidity? Male readers might need warnings for those.
Right. True.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Sure. Someone had gone in.
It might not be everybody's jam.
Yeah, but if I may, just stop reading the fucking story then.
DNFing is not against the law.
No, it's but I mean it. Some like if you start reading a story, you're going on a journey, and nothing forces you to see it through to the end. I understand trigger warnings for things like rape or very very intense subject matters, but like the interracial stuff, the gay, like I've written straight stories and I've written gay stories, and I understand that everybody's going to be, you know, willing to go to read those stories all the way to the end, but that doesn't require warning.
So I think there's two sides of the conversation. There's the reader respect side, and then there's the business side. So let's say you don't have the warning. Somebody's immediate, well, not everybody, by mind you, but there are people whose immediate response is to go leave you a bad review. So, I mean, yes, you can just be like, you're in it. This is the Wild West. Do like whatever happens, happens. You can absolutely do that. But I mean, I think from a business standpoint, you do kind of, I don't want to say leave yourself vulnerable to that, but I think it creates more of a stage for that.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any final questions? Because we're getting to the end of our 45 minutes. So are there any final questions that we may have? We can go a little over, so don't feel like you have to not ask your question. Or any more comments?
Well, I'll ask a quick question. So
Okay.
I don't know if any of you guys write non-erotica as well, right? Like mainstream fiction. And I wonder if you guys see any differentiation between trigger warnings for erotica, which already kind of has one trigger warning. It's erotica.
Yeah.
As opposed, so I published a mainstream novel last year. There's a violent death off screen. Somebody walks in and finds their best friend bloody and dead. I didn't even think about putting in any kind of warnings about that because it would have been a spoiler, right? So curious if you guys have any thoughts about that.
So I think my kind of initial thought is that like we tend to disproportionately warn for sexual content versus violent content. I would argue that you tend to see a lot more content warnings related to sexuality than to anything violent, and by extension, erotica and romance tends to be sort of overwarned for, as opposed to anything, any sort of violent that just kind of happens in any other type of fiction.
That's fair.
I only write smut, so I don't know.
Oh, same. I'm talking about like from a reader perspective. I never see like, oh, dude gets choked warned for.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I write cozy mystery too.
Okay.
I along with my smut, but and there's murder in it, but I never thought about it, I guess, because I felt like my title and my cover kind of covered that it's just basically like it is lighthearted, but there is also murder. So I'm not sure if I ever should have, but it was never an issue. Like nobody said, oh my God, she killed somebody in this book. And it should be on the warning page. I kind of think sometimes your niche or your genre answers the questions too. Sometimes on certain things, not everything.
Yeah, I think
So
you're
I
right.
just, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think Sunny's right, because if you take a look at in my other writing life, I write horror, and you barely see any content warnings when it comes to violence or scary images like that. You'll never see a content warning in front of a Stephen King book, for instance, or like Dean Koontz or anyone like that. Now that could be because they're famous, but yeah, I think just because it says horror, you kind of go into it thinking, oh, there's going to be violence, there's going to be scary stuff, there's going to be, like the book Tender is the Flesh. I don't know if you guys read that one, a great read, but it's cannibalism, and I don't believe there's any content warning in front of that one either. So that's my comment.
Yeah. So I think content warnings in romance specifically is very helpful, because some people, when they post their books, authors, they don't check the box 18 and over. So that 18 and over kind of is a trigger in itself for people, knowing that there's going to be certain level of content that they're going to encounter, kind of like horror or mystery. But if you don't check that box, then that's where the content warnings become very helpful. Because it used to be we were thrown in the smut dungeon, which apparently now isn't a thing, but I still appear to be there, which is fine.
It's a thing.
I'm in good company, but
it's a thing.
But I checked the box. So
yeah.
But I did see an interesting question pop up, and I don't want to delay us too much, but I thought it was interesting. Somebody was asking about content warnings in paranormal, like if it's necessary because they're not necessarily real people. I would say yes, because the acts themselves can be very similar. And when you're reading paranormal, you're still connecting at a human level. You know, these are still lived experiences based off of real life. So for me, I do write paranormal, and I do connect it, or try, to connect into that human emotion and that connection. So
I agree with that. Yeah. Any last comments? No, any more questions? Did I miss any of these chat comments that you guys could that any questions that might have stuck out to you? All right. Well, I want to thank you guys all for sitting on their very first panel, opening us up, which is great. I think it went well. Right now, we do have in the main room, Meg Becker will be there at 10:10, and Ariel Dawn will be there at 10:35 doing takeovers. And then there is the next panel starting at 10, and that is with Marty. He is going to be the moderator, and that is publishing ins and outs. So I hope to see you guys all there. Do you guys all know how to leave the room? If you have any questions, then you'll see a little leave the room. Make sure when you do, though, you don't say leave the meeting. You just say you're going to leave the breakout room. All right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks,
I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.